Hi, folks. This is Mr. Thomas, your friendly neighborhood film instructor again, and this is a class for DMPT 2640 color correction. This is episode number 2. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 1, balancing footage, but I'm also going to actually start off by giving you a tour of the DaVinci Resolve interface. Basically, an interface is anything that you interact with to get the program to do something for you. Okay, so using an analogy, an interface in a car is a steering wheel, the stick shift, the brake, and the accelerator. Okay, with DaVinci Resolve in the computer, the interface is everything that's on the screen, the icons, the windows, everything you would click or manipulate within the app to get it to work for you. So if you hear me use the word interface or user interface, that's what I'm talking about. So let's get started here by launching DaVinci Resolve. And I am on a MacBook Pro. And if you are using a PC or using Windows, it's a very similar process. One of the things that I do want to say up front before I forget is that one of the main differences is the keyboard shortcuts on Mac versus PC. And there's only really one difference, and you probably already know it. Anytime you're supposed to use the command key on a Mac for a keyboard shortcut, you would use the control key instead on a PC. That's because PCs don't have control keys. There's actually a second difference, and that's if in a Mac, if you want to use the Option key on a Mac, you would use the Alt key, ALT key, on a PC when you're doing keyboard shortcuts. All right. So let's go ahead and launch DaVinci Resolve. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my dock here, and my icon for DaVinci Resolve is not there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into my Finder. I'm actually glad I did that because you might not have it in your dock either. Click on the Finder button here on the dock if you have a Mac, and then go into Applications, all right? And then look for DaVinci Resolve. The version that I have is DaVinci Resolve, DaVinci Resolve 16 is the version that I have. Is it under Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve? Or here it is. Oh, no, that's something else. Blackmagic Raw. Let's see, where are we? I'm going to type in a search. Okay, type in DaVinci Resolve in my search field. And here it is right here, DaVinci Resolve. Okay, I'm going to double click on that. Don't know why I didn't see it from the applications window, and it's going to launch for me. In a PC, of course, you know, you would go to your Windows button, click on that, and go into Applications, and you would, or Programs, and you would find your DaVinci Resolve app and double click it, and it'll launch just like we are here. As you can see, DaVinci Resolve 16. Okay, first thing that may come up is if your version is not the most current version. Okay, like you can see here, it says my current version is version 16.2, but there's a 16.2.2 that's out. That just happened like today. Then you can choose to click download and install it, or you can click remind me later, which is what I'm going to do because I want to go ahead and get this started. Okay, the first window you're going to see is the project manager. The project manager. Okay, basically, if you've used Premiere Pro or really any editing program, the idea of a project should be very, very familiar to you. A project is a list of all the decisions you made in that program on that particular movie, music video, whatever you're working on. Okay, all the instructions that you typed in, basically all the cuts, all the decisions you made in that program. That's what a project is. It's a lot more than that. It's also your preferences that you set up. It's also your it's also any effects that you add. In this case, color correction, any transitions, things like that. All of that is encapsulated or stored inside of the project file. Think of it as a recipe, just like we said in Premiere. It's a recipe like the recipe to bake a cake, a list of instructions. Okay, as you can see in this age of airplanes icon here, or thumbnail, project thumbnail in my project manager, if I move the mouse, I'm not clicking it, I'm just moving my mouse over this thumbnail, it'll kind of give you an idea of what this project is all about, what the footage is. Don't worry about it if you don't have this one. This is from a different book on DaVinci Resolve. However, this second project file is from the book. Okay, it's called Disunity Documentary. That's the first thing that we're doing. Now, one thing that they talk to you about in the very first chapter is archiving, archiving Resolve projects. Well, they teach you how to open and archive Resolve. They teach you how to open a Resolve archive, but they also teach you how to create a Resolve archive. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly see how you would create a Resolve archive. All right, I'm sorry, how you would open a Resolve archive, because that's the first thing they ask you to do. First thing we're going to do, y'all, we're going to teach you how to open a Resolve archive. How we do that is you simply press and hold down the Control key, okay, and that's Mac or PC, and you want to click in the Project Manager, any part of the gray area here, and then you would go to Restore Project Archive. Click on that, all right? And then you would find the project archive that you want to restore, okay? So say for example, if you wanted to restore this Disunity Documentary project archive, DaVinci Resolve archive, I would click on that and choose open. I've already restored it, so I'm not going to do it again, but DRA stands for DaVinci Resolve Archive. Okay, so I find the DaVinci archive that I wanted to, see if I have any others here, that might be the only one, that I want to restore, and I would click open and it would restore it for me, and it would show you, the archive would appear in your DaVinci Resolve Project Manager. Now, you may ask, well, what is an archive? Well, remember how I said that when you're working on a DaVinci Resolve project, you have a project file, okay? A DaVinci Resolve project file, and the tag on that is a .drp. Archive is .dra for DaVinci Resolve Archive. A project is .drp. And the difference between a project and an archive is a project, every archive has a project file in it, because of the fact that in order to do any work in Resolve, or really any nonlinear editor, if it's Premiere or Final Cut or Avid or whatever, you have to have two things. You have to have the project file, which is a list of instructions that you've made, okay? The list of decisions that you made when you were working on last. And you have to have the media. That means what you shot with the camera and imported into your computer, okay? So when you open up the project file, it's going to look at the media, the footage that you shot, and it's going to place everything in your timeline and create all the effects, everything that you did to it the last time you opened it up. It's going to restore it to what it was last time you saw it. That's how the project and the media work together, all right? It's kind of like a recipe, the project file, and the raw ingredients to make for example, cake. That would be the media. In order to make the cake, you got your recipe, your list of instructions, you have your raw ingredients, the flour, the egg, the vanilla extract. That's the media. And you put the two together. You read off the instructions as you make the cake, as you assemble the parts of the cake. That is how you end up with your finished cake. Same thing with any nonlinear editor. You have your project file, you put that together with your media, and then that's when you have your finished film, your video, whether it's finished or you're still working on it. Now, of course, if you're starting off from scratch, you'll have your media, you have your ingredients, but your project file is blank. That means like this untitled project file here because you're starting off from scratch. All right. But the idea is an archive, on the other hand, is the project file and the media saved together in one folder. The archive is the project file and the media saved together in one folder. Because what you have to understand is that when you copy that media onto your hard drive, you may have copied it in your documents folder. And let's say when you made your project file, your list of instructions as you're editing, you save that project file. That's your list of decisions that you've made as you're editing. You saved it on your desktop. Now, say for example, you want to do some work on another computer. You can't just take your project file because you have your instructions, but you don't have your media. That's like having a recipe, but no ingredients with which to make the cake. You can't just take your media. That would be like taking your ingredients to another kitchen, but you left your recipe behind. In order to recreate that cake, you need to have your recipe and your media in the same place at the same time. That's what an archive is. What it does is it puts your project file, your DaVinci Resolve project file, together with your media, and it saves it as a DaVinci Resolve archive. All right, so it's very convenient because if I've been working at school, for example, and I want to finish up at home, I can make a DaVinci Resolve archive, and it'll package together my project file and my media. I don't have to worry about, did I leave something at school that's not going to allow me to complete my work. I can drag that archive file to my flash drive if it's big enough, take it home, stick it in my computer at home, restore that archive, and we just saw how we did that. Restoring the archive will break out the media and the project file. It'll break them out separately, okay? Break them out of that folder. And so now I can go ahead and launch that project file and start to work. So that's what we're going to do here in the project manager. We're going to launch the project file for project 1, this Unity documentary. I can either click it and click open, or I can double click it, or I can right click or control click the thumbnail for the project file and click open. I can do any one of those three things and it'll open up my project file in Resolve. And here is the interface for Resolve that we see here. Okay, one thing that you may or may not know is Resolve does a lot more than color correct. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you have a lot of different icons here. Media, basically, media is a portion of the application that allows you to import footage that you shot into Resolve, okay, and it also allows you to organize it. Cut means DaVinci Resolve lets you edit footage just like you would, Cut lets you edit footage, but in a very simple way, okay? Not like you would do in Premiere. It's like you would do something really, really quick. If you want to just trim some clips and do some quick work, you can do that. Edit allows you to do higher end editing like you would do it in a Premiere or Avid. Fusion allows you to do digital compositing work or motion graphics work, just like After Effects. Color allows you to do color correction work, and this is the portion of the program we're going to be dealing with in this class, this button right here. So most of the time, as soon as Resolve opens, if it's not already opened up, you're going to click on this color button at the bottom so we do color correction. Fairlight, which you can tell by the icon here, that has to do with sound effects and music, creating sound effects and music for your videos. And Deliver, which is encoding or compression, basically making it so that your video is ready for someone else to see it. That could mean preparing it so that you can upload it to YouTube, preparing it so you can upload it to Facebook or Vimeo or Instagram or wherever you upload it. And also, they will also allow you to make a version for projection in a movie theater, like big time cinema. All that is taken care of in the Deliver portion. But right now, we're just gonna be working on color. We may actually do some delivery work near the end of the course, because after we finish doing all this color correction, you're gonna output it. Typically, you would deliver it to your finished version to the next person in the post-production chain behind you as a colorist, okay? Many times that could be the visual effects or the digital effects people to put special effects in sometimes. But that's what the buttons at the bottom are all about, okay? let's see, we have the gallery right here. This area here is called the gallery. And basically what the gallery is for is this. Say, for example, you've already done some color correction work. Say you've corrected the brightness levels and the colors of an image. And you're like, hey, I have another image that looks very similar to this. I'm going to be dealing with this kind of image a lot. You can take a still image of that first image that you color corrected, okay, or color graded, and save it in the gallery so that you can go back to it and you can match a new image to what you did on the old image, okay? We'll get to that much later, but that's the gallery you would see. I don't have any stills created, but if I did create stills, they would pop up here, okay? Next to it, you have the viewer window right here. This viewer window works just like the program monitor in Premiere. It's like a TV that shows you the clip that you were working on right then, okay? And you can play it back. We have the controls, just like a VCR at the bottom: playback, stop, rewind, rewind to beginning, fast forward to end, loop playback. That's very useful. So if you wanted to play back the same clip over and over again like that, I'll clip loop playback and hit play. Okay, you can see I have a time code that's running right here. If there's any audio that you need, which I'm not gonna say you never need it, but it's rare that we have to deal with any audio and color correction. You would do it there. You have an eyedropper icon that works just like the eyedropper icon in, it looks similar to the eyedropper icon in Photoshop, except for we call it a qualifier. You can see here, a qualifier is a way that I can say, hey, I wanna pick out this orange color or this reddish color right above the hills here. I want to isolate that color because I want to make it not so much orange. You use a qualifier to do that, okay? Kind of similar in concept to keying, all right? So viewer window, mostly what we'll be dealing with is just looking at your footage that you're correcting. Over here, we have the node window, and this is a very, very important window right here because of the fact that we basically, we have a node-based system of working in DaVinci Resolve. We're going to talk more about that later. It's not difficult at all to get down. It's very easy. It's very convenient. It makes it so that you're going to be doing a lot of different things to your footage, okay? But the two basic classes of things that you're going to be doing, for the most part, are changes in brightness. You can make things that are too dark, brighter, things that are too bright, darker. For example, there's a very crude explanation of it, but that's the basis of it. And secondly, in a separate step, you're going to be working with color, changing the hue. That means the color family: red, yellow, orange, blue, and the saturation, how pure the color is. Is it kind of like a pinkish kind of red, or is it like a candy apple red? That could be an example of saturation. So luminance, brightness; chrominance, color. Those are the two things that you're going to be dealing with in DaVinci Resolve, and you would make those adjustments to luminance and chrominance on nodes, because you can see this node has the same picture that's in the viewer. So if I were to do something, make an adjustment, we'll see this later. If I were to make an adjustment here on this node, it would apply it to this viewer, okay? And of course, you could have more than one node, because say on one node, I want to do a primary balance, for example, and impact the brightness, luminance. You always do a luminance correction first. So you get your brightness values correct first. And then I want to correct my chrominance or play with my colors in a separate step. So I can separate those two processes so that I can tweak one and not mess with the other. But in order to do that, I would have to add another node. So I can go to the color menu, which is where you're going to be spending a lot of time, go to nodes, and then I can add a serial node. As you can see, there are lots of different kinds of nodes. Serial node, there's a parallel node, there's a layer node, there's a splitter and combiner node, an outside node, okay? So I'm just gonna just show you, I'm gonna add a serial node. You can see I have a separate node here. So for example, if I wanted to do my luminance corrections or my luminance adjustments for brightness here, I would do it on the first node. Then I would click to select the second node. You see the red highlight around it, and that would allow me to do my color correction for chrominance. It's a good way to work on things like that so that I keep everything as separate as possible. So that means that things aren't going to be mixing together. Kind of like in Photoshop, how you want to work on as many separate layers as possible, as practical and possible, so that you don't end up mixing two different effects on the same layer, and say you want to get rid of one or change one and you can't because it's mixed together with the other effect on that same layer. You want to avoid that. Okay. Down here we have the timeline window. You can see I have a series of thumbnails, right? And all I can really do is I can click on a thumbnail and you can see it's red when it's selected, and then I can play it. Okay, look at the viewer window to see it play. I'll click on this one and play it. See the lady talking there. Okay, all right. But the idea is I don't have the same degree of control over the clips that I would have if I was editing it. For example, if you said, hey, this clip is too long, I need to make it shorter, or I need to trim it in some way, color correction is not where you would do that. You'd have to go back to the edit section of Resolve. And now I'm in editing. If you've worked with Premiere or any other editing program before, you can see the kind of the familiar video and audio bars, and you can kind of see the tracks and the track headers, kind of similar to Premiere. So you would have to go back here if you wanted to trim a clip. You can see I have thumbnails here as well. All right. And these thumbnails, there's one out that's in question. Okay, if I wanted to trim it, there are different things I can do to trim it, right? And then once I've got it right, I would go back to color, and then I would continue with the process and color correct. Now, I want to discourage you from doing that. As far as, we're not going to be doing any editing in this class, really, not with DaVinci Resolve, but I want to discourage you from editing something, doing some color correction. I edited it wrong, and I go back to editing and make some tweaks, and then go back to color correction. Don't get involved in that back and forth. It can be extremely confusing, very time consuming, and you're going to mess up a lot. And generally speaking, that's not how the process works in the real world anyway. Generally speaking, the editor does all of their work and they lock picture. That means no more changes are going to be made. Then they hand it off to the colorist. Notice that these icons at the bottom of the screen, they're generally in the same order that your workflow. That means the steps that you would take to finish a film, that's the order that they're in. Okay? So going back to previous steps, that's a tremendously bad idea. Before you move on to the next step, you need to make sure the previous step is complete. You have a mini timeline here, whereas, like, for example, I don't need to necessarily know what the clip looks like that I'm on. I just want to know that I'm on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clip in the timeline. Okay? That's what the mini timeline is for, because you'll see a little later on, I can collapse my timeline like that, right? I can make my timeline I can make my screen full screen like that, right? So the idea is, if I don't need my timeline, I can, look at my mini timeline here, and it kind of gives me the same information from a bird's eye view, let's say. All right, let's look down here at I have a little button panel here. There are lots of buttons that we're going to deal with, but the main one we're going to deal with is with color correction. We have the color wheels. This icon right here is the icon for the color wheels. Click on that, and you can see that I have these colorful circles here, okay? And I also have these thumb wheels at the bottom. Okay, these thumb wheels at the bottom. I have these color wheels, okay, shadow, midtone, highlight, offset, and then I have the master wheels, which are like little thumb wheels, right, in real life at the bottom. They control two different things. The master wheels, you always deal with those first. That controls the luminance of your image. That means the brightness of the image. And I'm in the log wheels. I'm in the log controls, the logarithmic controls. We'll talk about what that is later on. But you can see that they have the name shadow, which controls the darkest part of the image, midtone, which controls the middle brightness part of the image, and highlight, which explicitly controls the brightest part of the image. So I'll show you right here. That's the highlight, right on her chin. The shadows would be, let's see, what's the darkest part of the image? Maybe back here, the shed in the background. And the midtones would be somewhere in between, like the shaded part of her face. Well, I can make the shaded part of her face brighter by dragging this midtone wheel to the right. Okay, you can see all the midtones in the whole picture are going up, but you can see her face is brighter, see? See that? And also notice I had that first node selected, so that increase in midtone luminance was applied to that node. I'm gonna undo that by either going Edit, Undo, or using the keyboard shortcut Command Z, okay? So the idea is each one of these master wheels at the bottom, they control a different tonal range. Tonal range is what we call shadows, the darkest part of the image, highlights, the brightest part of the image, midtones, somewhere not as bright as highlights, not as dark as shadows, somewhere in between. Most skin tones, most normal skin tones are in the midtone area most of the time. But you do have, skin tone and the shadow and the highlight depending upon how the light is striking the subject, okay? Offset, the master wheel for offset down here, basically what that is say I have my shadows, midtones, and highlights all set, and they're all great in relation to each other, but as far as the overall levels, they're all too dark. So I want to bring them all up at the same time. That's where my offset wheel comes in. I can drag to the right and bring everything up brighter, or drag to the left and take everything down darker, okay? So that's what the offset thumb wheel does. Notice the thumb wheels, I'm just talking about what's at the bottom underneath the color circles here, okay? The color wheels right here, and this is the offset, the master wheel. So we have a color wheel for shadow, we have a master wheel for shadow, a color wheel for midtone, and a master wheel for midtone. Say make a correction using the shadow, either the shadow color wheel or the shadow master wheel, you could click this little swirly arrow to undo that correction that you made, and it'll take it back to whatever the last thing you did was. Okay. One thing I want to show you is I made a correction to the offset correction to this clip right here with the lady. Notice that there's like a little rainbow frame around this clip number. It's clip number 6. The rainbow frame tells me I made a correction to it. I've changed it from what it was originally. That's what the rainbow frame means. Also, notice that I have time code here, okay? 0 hours, 28 minutes, 59 seconds, and 10 frames. That's how long that clip is, okay? Notice that whether it's 28 minutes long or whether it's hold on one second. Actually, I have a correction to make. That's not the duration of it. That's the master time code. That's the master time code. All right? That's the master time code. The clip itself is only roughly 7 seconds. Okay? Roughly 7 seconds. Okay? And I did that by just scrubbing the video over and looking at how much time elapsed in my master time code here from 1 hour, 0 minutes, 12 seconds, and 19 frames. I drag all the way to the right to the end of the clip by dragging this little vertical line, 19 seconds. So that's roughly 6 seconds and 11 frames-ish, somewhere in there, okay? So, but I want to say no matter how long a clip is, for example, this clip is only 3 seconds. It's half as long, but notice the thumbnail for this one is exactly the same duration as for this one. Okay, so when we're doing color correction, it's not like with editing where, I'll go back to here, where the longer a clip is, the longer a clip is, the longer a clip is in duration, the longer it is in the timeline. Like this clip right here is longer than the second clip of the horses, okay? This is in editing, okay? The reason why this first clip of the rhinos is longer than the second clip, the horse is a longer rectangle, okay, is because of the fact that it's longer in duration. It's literally longer in duration, okay? We don't care about that. I'm going back to color. We don't care about that in color correction, about how long a clip is. We just want to know that it's there, what order it's in and what does it look like. That's all we care about. How long it is, how short it is, we don't care, right? So I showed you the button for the color wheels. That's one way we can color. We can adjust for luminance and chrominance. Chrominance would be the color wheel up on top. So essentially, if I wanted to, if you look at the horse there, if I said, that horse is looking, he ain't looking that great as far as, I want to add a little more red. Let's warm him up a little bit. What I can do is I can click and drag this center control in the color wheel and drag it towards the red on the color wheel that's surrounding it. Okay, and that's a very extreme change. But you can see now, make it full screen. You can see there's more of a red tint to it, or a red cast. The whole image is red, not just the horse. The whole image is red, okay? And I can do a before and an after, okay? Let's do this. This is, let me see if I can. Okay, here it is. Hopefully we will see this. This is before. See, it's kind of milky and red, milky and kind of bluish, cooler. It's cooler. That's after. It looks redder. Basically, I'm doing a Command D keyboard shortcut to bypass the adjustment to red, that color on the color wheel. It was added to that node. When I do a Command D, it bypasses. That means it ignores that adjustment that I made. Colorists and DITs do this a lot. They toggle between before and after so they can see the difference. And you have to do that because your eyes quickly get used to a change that you've made. And it's pretty, sometimes, if you wait too long, you can't really tell what you just did because of the fact that your eyes have adjusted to the change. Notice that I've turned off, I bypassed the grade on that. I bypassed the grade on that clip. And notice in my node here, it's kind of darkened. The picture is kind of darkened. That tells me that I bypass it. The grade is still on it. I'm just not seeing it because it's kind of like pressing the mute button, but on a visual color grade. I'm going to do a Command D to bring it back. And as you can see, now it's back in vibrant color. I know I've not bypassed it. I can see I have my rainbow frame around the clip number. And that tells me that I've made some kind of change to it. If I don't have a rainbow frame, if it's just a gray frame like this, then I know that I haven't made any changes to it. All right. So we kind of have an idea of the color wheels and the master wheels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click the undo button. And as you can see, it took away that color wheel change that I made. Underneath the master wheels, I have an R for red, a G for green, and a B for blue for the darkest parts of the image, shadows, the midtones, and the brightest part of the image, the highlights, and also for the offset. Basically, this is a good way of telling what changes you've made to that particular tonal range. Because shadow, midtone, highlights, those are tonal ranges. Okay. And when you make changes, these numbers will change, but they start off from 0. Okay. RGB, those are called color channels. Every image that you can see with the human eye is a mixture of red, green, and blue light. You can get the different colors by mixing different amounts of red, green, and blue, or eliminating red, green, or blue altogether. Okay. There's a little color theory we'll talk about later. We also have a series of controls down here at the bottom. Okay, the adjustment panel down here at the bottom. There are 2 pages. I know page 1. Okay, page 1 it has a red one. Page 2, if I click on that, I go to a second set. Look at these controls: contrast, pivot, low range, high range, saturation, hue. Saturation and hue, you may know. Okay, contrast, you may know. Okay, to change any of these values, I would click on them and drag. I'm going to increase the contrast by clicking and dragging so that the contrast amount changes from 1.0 to 1.52. And look at my horse. It's far more contrasty. Okay, let's see the before and after. That's the after, that's the before. After, before. Now, I told you about log encoded footage, right? In the intro, okay? This is an example of something of what a log encoded image would look like. So when it came out of the camera, it would look like that. When you put it in in DaVinci Resolve, it would look like that. And it's your job as a digital imaging technician to stretch the contrast, stretch the dynamic range, so it would look more like that. Okay, that's not perfect, but I think you get the idea of what we're going for. And to basically determine exactly how much of a change you should make, you would look at your scopes. These, well, there are 4 different types of scopes. This particular type of scope is called the RGB parade, because the red trace, they call it, this milky lines is called trace. That shows you how much of a contribution of red light there is in the image. The green tells you how much of a contribution there is of green light, and the blue tells you how much of a contribution there is of blue light. So what I'm going to do is watch this. I'm going to go back to what I did before, and I'm going to drag. Okay, look at how the red trace changed. Okay, and the green and the blue trace changed as well. Okay, that basically tells you I don't really use the parade scopes or any scopes to do anything. It just it reflects to me the effects of what I am doing, other than just, of course, looking at the monitor there. Okay, if I go up on the highlights as well, hey, notice, look at that. When I go up on the highlights, look at how the top of the trace for the red channel goes higher up. Okay, that's a clue of what's going on. Highlights are at the top of this scope. Shadows are at the bottom. We're going to talk about scopes later on, but let's get back to our tour. Okay, contrast, pivot, low range, high range, so forth. That's on the first page. Okay, I'm going to change contrast back to 1.0. All right, now it looks kind of bad now, right? If we go to page 2, you can see that I have another set of adjustment controls: temperature, tint, MD, color boost, shadows, and highlights. Okay, and so we're going to talk about that later on. MD stands for midpoint, by the way. Midpoint. We'll talk about that later on. We talked about the scopes here. The only other thing I want to talk about the scopes is the fact that the parade scope is one scope, but we're also going to look at the waveform. Okay, sometimes I call it the waveform monitor. This is just basically, you say, what is that? I see more trace here, but it's all black and white, or gray and white and gray and black. The waveform is basically a chart of the brightness levels going from left to right on the screen. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but this is just basically an instrument to tell me how bright the pixels are on the screen. 0 means it's my black point, totally black. 1023 means it's my white point, or totally white. Okay, generally speaking, you don't want to necessarily have trace going all the way down to black, but you don't necessarily want it going all the way down to white. Just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on, if I look from left to right on the waveform monitor, it's a mirror, or it's not a mirror, but it's a duplication of what's on the screen. How so, do you say? Well, if I look from left to right, I see a blob right here. That's the horse, okay? The reason why I know it's the horse is it's kind of shaped like the horse from left to right. I can see the legs here, right? Right there, it's kind of shaped like a horse. But that it only looks like the screen from left to right. From up to down, none of the vertical relationships in this picture exist, okay? So the idea is, for example, this leg right here, even though it's lower in the frame than the horse's nose, the leg will be higher in the frame than the horse's nose on a vertical, in a vertical orientation. So this could be, let's say this is the nose here, and that could be the leg up here. Okay. The reason for that is the higher something is on the in a scope, the brighter it is. The lower it is on the scope, the darker it is. Left and right doesn't make a difference. It's just like the image. Up and down, though, it's higher if it's brighter, it's darker if it's lower. That's something that takes a lot of getting used to, I'll be honest with you, because of the fact that a lot of people have a hard time adjusting to looking at that blob and being able to tell that that's a horse. Okay, I can also tell you based on the left-right composition that this horse right here, I have a little spike right here, that's that white horse in the background right here. Okay, you'll be able to learn to read traces in Sculpso later on. Last thing I want to talk about is the menu at the top of the screen. The menu, just like any other program that gives you access to different commands. Usually, there are 3 ways to do anything in Premiere. You can use a keyboard shortcut. That means a series of keys you press. You can click on a menu and choose a correct command, okay? Or you can click on something on the screen, okay? You can click a button on the screen to get it to do something. Generally, that's how it works. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Sometimes you can also invoke a command or cause a command to happen by control clicking something and going down and choosing a command like reset node grade. Resetting a node grade basically means that the selected node is gonna get rid of all the changes that I've made to it. You can see, I know it's gotten rid of all the changes because my little rainbow frame is gone. Okay, so that's our first introduction to the Adobe for the Resolve interface, the DaVinci Resolve interface in the color portion of the program. Hopefully that's been helpful to some of you, and this has been a great episode 2. I'm going to continue on with talking about, in my next episode, talking about the difference between the log color wheels and the primaries color wheels, which is normally where you start. One thing you can notice is that instead of shadows, midtones, and highlights, I now have lift, which represents the shadows, gamma, which represents the midtones, and gain, which represents the highlights. My offset is still the same though. Okay, that did not change. Okay, so that's all we have for episode 2. It's been a great 41 minutes and 55 seconds. And episode 3, we're going to talk more about the controls and a few other things from chapter 1. Thank you.